What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Phoenix channel. Today is Thursday, January 20th, 2022. I'm coming to you live up in the mountains in my new cut. So, Phoenix made the move. I'm still known as Phoenix, but I'm out of the desert, um, adapting to the snow life. As you guys might know, when I started this channel, just before we get into the news, I actually lived beach for a number of years. I was a beach guy. I actually grew up in Venice, near I guess Brock Pierce's perhaps background or his one of his areas he stayed at. But since then, I then elected to move to the desert. Spent like 4 years there, sweating my balls off, learning quite a bit, and finished my work there. And I'm finally in a position where I've started to try the mountains. And so I think there's a notion of just for people to learn to adapt to different environments and see where or what fits you best. You don't really know that unless you actually go out and try and venture on those things. So I've tried to test my challenge myself to do that, I guess, more than perhaps I would have done in the past. Because in the past, I would have just been fearful or scared to try different ventures. But one thing with crypto that it taught me is to just try and venture and perhaps even fail. So I'm looking to do that here, in terms of not necessarily failing, but learning and just adapting and actually trying to embrace more programming, more technology, kind of have that freedom now. So that's what I'm looking to do. So I'm wondering for 2022, what are you guys doing? What are some of the moves you guys have made? I'd be interested in learning about that or hearing about it. I myself, my goal this year, just beyond the big change I made, is actually uh, mastering full stack. It's something I've tried off and on. I've been busy with my actual work, so I haven't been able to do it. But this year, I really have an opportunity where if I want to do something like that, I can. And I've been trying to throw in a dash of EOS in that um, development if it makes sense to. So, in any event, enough of my personal rants today. Let's get into the EOS news. So, for those that are new to this channel, we like to talk about EOS. And EOS, for me, is it's like one of those it's like one of those virtual cities in cyberspace, right? We have cities in the real world, quote unquote, the real world that we have. We have like Tokyo and Los Angeles and New York and Manhattan, right, and Paris and all these amazing places to travel to and experience and learn about other cultures and just different ways of life. And similar to that, in the virtual space, we have digital currencies and virtual cities, virtual countries and communities. EOS being one of them, and EOS is, I think, over the past couple of years, strive to try to develop its identity in terms of what what it offers, right, to its citizenry. So its citizenry, in this case, would be token holders that hold EOS tokens. And so early on in the landscape of, I think, cryptocurrencies, there was certainly an idea or a huge focus on making money. And so since that's emerged and you've had projects like Bitcoin that have matured in that domain, I think we could all agree. You look at the moves by someone like Michael Saylor and using something like Bitcoin as a monetary asset and on his treasury balance sheet for his company MicroStrategy. And for those that have followed Phoenix for a long time, I saw that very early and um, made a move into that space, front ran basically a lot of the major institutions, and was pretty successful, at least in terms of my retirement account of um, uh, receiving some of that appreciation. Just that recognition of a bold move from a guy like Saylor, who is a savage in a good way. So shout out to Michael Saylor. But we have other notions of value. So one is the monetary storage of monetary energy, which is really what a lot of Bitcoiners, I count myself in one of those domains, um, believe in. But there's the notion of maybe reputational value or um, resource assets, right, on the network, like the development of land. And as you develop the land from, say, raw soil and say weeds or plants into, say, more like a mercantile city, there is value towards that. So in the early days of EOS, a lot of the resources on EOS, CPU and RAM, that notion of bandwidth was attractive. Thinking about it like a digital real estate as opposed to storage of value. And so since then, there's been some evolution in thinking about how EOS could um, perhaps evolve. And I don't think we've seen the finalization of that. Seems like EOS is still trying to find its identity. And if I'm just going to keep it 100% with everybody, I'm not so sure there's been a solid investment argument as to why maybe someone outside the EOS centric community would be interested in holding EOS token at this point, because it doesn't necessarily represent a storage of monetary energy. We do have inflation. Some of the notions on, for example, the resource allocation is in discussions with the likes of Dan Larimer and how resources might be reimagined on EOS. So I'm not so sure resources is it. And so there has been some recent discussions about using EOS, for example, perhaps as a DAC of DACs, decentralized autonomous communities. And so that could be possibly maybe a new use for EOS's token, maybe as a way to formulate these decentralized autonomous companies or communities or groups. And so we'll just have to see how that evolves. But the latest in terms of the discussions with the likes of Brock Pierce, we haven't seen, I think, that fully get resolved. If you guys recall my last video, there was a lot of trauma between um, Brock Pierce, Block One, and the EOS community as a whole. I did a whole video on that in my last rant back in December. So if you guys are interested in hearing a little bit more, getting some context for that, please check out my previous video that I made on that topic. I kind of covered I think the article that was issued by Ibla Rose, who in his own mind, in his own right, has become quite a formidable, I think, personality on the EOS, whether you like him or dislike him. I kind of have mixed reviews on the guy, personally speaking, but nevertheless, he is in the seat. He is in the hot seat, I guess, in terms of having a significant influence on the EOS community. So it just doesn't seem like that has changed from the perspective of the rift between the perceived rug pull that Block One basically undertook. For those that don't know, Block One has essentially taken the assets that were generated or contributed by the community, both Bitcoin and Ethereum, I believe. Most of that was converted into portions of cash, but also Bitcoin, and taken those assets and leveraged them into their project Bullish, which is an exchange that has been under pilot. And Bullish is also a company that's looking to go public. They are now a SPAC, but I think they're looking to then transition that into more of a formal listing of Bullish on the New York Stock Exchange and run by the former New York Stock Exchange. I think it's a president, of some kind, or some senior level executives that made up the New York Stock Exchange or ran it. So we have that history there. So we don't necessarily at this point have solid support from the likes of Block One, nor is there access to that balance sheet. So it seems like everything moving forward is now an evolution in the community's thinking in terms of um, how initiatives are funded, whether that is developers or new tooling or marketing by the bees. A lot of that seems to be based on using the inflation of some kind, using these allocated tokens, and distributing those to the community. Now, that's a good and bad thing. On the positive, it shows in some ways that EOS as a network is becoming more decentralized away from, say, large influential companies like Block One. The disadvantage, of course, is that with a um, say financing through what is really just inflation, it does put pressure on the price. So as tokens are distributed to these individuals, whether they're developers or marketers or whatever they are, or founders, as they look to cash in those tokens to raise actual US dollars, it actually is a tax or a pressure on the price of the tokens themselves that are in circulation overall across all holders. So it's not necessarily a free thing. I know a lot of people in the Network Foundation market it that way, but I don't see it in that domain. So it's really about the effectiveness of and the deployment of that capital. Is it money worth spent? Is it money well worth um, the allocation of those tokens? Is it money worth spent? Or money well spent, I should say. And I think it's been a mixed bag. I mean, if you look at like the EOSBs, I'm not convinced, for example, that it's just my own personal opinion. So don't. Hopefully, I don't get a lot of flack for this. I got my flak jacket on behind, under this, so I'm willing to take some flak shots. But I just don't see the effectiveness of a lot of the marketing that is occurring within EOS. I think that in order to be effective in terms of reaching out to the broader community, the broader crypto community, those types of fabrics need to go beyond just Twitter or just rants within EOS Twitter. We saw some of that today. Kudos to Zach Gall. I think he probably led the efforts to reach out to CoinDesk and some publications that make up the broader crypto community, and making some publications about EOS and the transitions that are occurring, the return of Dan Larimer in some ways with some of his ideas. I think that's a good sign. I think we need to see more of that. When we start to see more EOS centric type behavior or rants on Twitter, I just don't think that's a good use of funds, nor do I think the talent, the kind of marketing strategy is there. So, in my opinion, kind of need to allocate those towards like Death Star type shots in the dark, where we're really targeting investment and marketing cost to mediums that are made up of millions of users, even outside of EOS, and even perhaps outside of crypto. So I don't think we're going to be successful until we have those types of initiatives or those types of changes. But that's just my opinion, guys. One of the beauties of this channel is that I am not paid by um, the foundation, nor do I really want to be. I'm just kind of an independent homie voice for you guys as a pleb who has been in the space for about as long as any other channel on YouTube covering EOS. And that even goes for the Everything EOS channel. So, anyways, that was my rant there. Dan Larimer released an article you guys can find on Medium. I think that was maybe this week or maybe last week. It was his latest, I guess, musings or thoughts on how EOS could be improved. And one of his ideas is this token contract on EOS, adding a token. I think it's an EOS symbol contract. And I think his idea is that right now on EOS, there isn't necessarily a standardization of those tokens. And so that leaves open a couple things. One, it's could lead to potential duplication of tokens on dexes that fool users, because basically what happens, for those that haven't been around in this crypto space for a while, is on dexes you could essentially list a token with a identical symbol to another token through a change in the contract that's being used. And so actually in the early days, or in the earlier days of Ethereum, we did see that, like in the, I think the 2015 or 2016 days. You had like the dexes like Ether Delta. And in the very early days, people would clone or copy or uh, introduce their own contract into Ether Delta, and it would list that and show the symbol or the token symbol as the same as the tokens that everybody wanted. And so it was a way that some people used to steal funds. And so Dan has acknowledged and recognized that. It's one of the good things that had come out from that Medium article, making more of a standardized contract. So if I understand it, would be a single contract that could be used by projects. And in doing that, it would sort of standardize. It would prevent some of the vulnerabilities we have with the current process, in which everybody is coming up with their own token contracts for their own projects. So why is that the case? Well, in doing their own contracts and not having a standardized contract, you guys could appreciate that it leaves open the idea of a founder, say, for example, changing the terms of what the token actually consists of, the token contract consists of, in terms of the quantity of tokens that are outstanding, or the distribution model, maybe the inflation model. There could be a lot to that. That means that there is, in theory, less certainty in terms of price discovery, because the rules are very flexible depending on maybe what one guy or a couple guys say. And so that, if that could be avoided, there's definitely positives or benefits in implementing standardization of tokens. So I see that as a positive. The other aspect to it could be that basically they could change not necessarily just the token distribution code, but the code itself, or maybe the way some of the other economics of the project. And so maybe by using this type of an approach, there could be an additional oversight by the EOS block producers themselves to have some way to provide additional certainty uh, about how and when changes are made to a project. We don't have that today. It's kind of open ended, or it's all custom. And in many cases, some projects will put in intentional loopholes so that if something does happen, they can go in there and make changes. But that also leaves open susceptibility to basically abuse by founders, right? To steal more money or steal more funds in some way. So it's not necessarily a good thing. So I'd like to hear what you guys think about this. One of the disadvantages with Dan's proposal with this token contract, I think, approach, and that he did mention, is that um, I think it does generate a need to update like the overall network to accomplish this. He also did mention that, or did propose, and these are all just ideas, obviously, but he did propose to have, I think, an auction system for these symbols that would be a part of this contract. I just find some of the economics to be, with these auction ideas, to be a little bit just complex or convoluted I think the intention is good, but I think that keeping things simple and to the point might be more advantageous. I'd like to know what you guys think. Do you have you guys read the Medium article? First of all, do you have any thoughts on it? Do you think an auction system for symbols that are within this contract would benefit the network? Would you feel more comfortable using these projects with a system like that? It would essentially then allow, if we were to move forward with a change of that magnitude, it would potentially allow the community to develop their own version of like coin market cap or some type of rating system where we look at projects that have used more standardized formatting uh, for, say, a token policy, token supply policy, or inflation policy. There's a lot of benefits to that. So I'd really like to know if you guys think there's any additional benefits to that. There could be a lot of other things built on top of it. Now that think about, as you standardize these tokens or these classes of service or communities, because they could also be DAX, right? And that's what we're going to get to next. Um, as those tokens are on this more standardized simple contract, could you add into that additional services that enhance the application? One of the ideas would be like reputational systems that maybe live within EOS but are outside that application and have a series of APIs or some other means to connect, say, a user's reputation within the city that is EOS within cyberspace to this like more niche application that accomplishes something for the world, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be all encompassing. The reputation system itself could be one, uh, say, major block of EOS, and that could then build other types of systems that maybe rely on that in some way. If I was going to, for example, rent my space that I have right now up in the mountains to other EOS community members, or have it for free, or give it away for free, like let people stay here for free, one of the things I'd want to make sure is I have some way to vet um, those individuals who would stay here, right? And so today we rely on central servers to accomplish that. We have applications like Airbnb, but maybe in the future, um, we look at blockchain reputational systems or DAX that allow us to exchange, maybe not sell, because obviously there's a lot of regulatory implications with tokens, especially with real estate. But maybe we develop a system where it's a trust system, and we work something out that allows us to barter um, our places we own and entitle other members who we trust or who develop some minimal level of trust within the community. They get some benefits to that, right? And so that was going back to my earlier. And what's up, Alexander? Going back to my previous meeting or discussions about why EOS or why someone want to hold it. I don't think we have that argument dialed in. It's not been vetted. It could be though that maybe as a member of EOS and through the development of trust, you have access to actual physical assets. Like you can go somewhere and stay, and or you can go to a different city, different physical jurisdictions. That could be a benefit. I also see the idea of EOS having much more enhanced or developed multi-sig systems being another benefit. But I think some of that is still evolving. There's also the idea of confiscation. So when we talk about smaller projects that are maybe developing on EOS, how do they respond to governmental pressures? And so that's another opportunity where maybe with these standardized contracts, or maybe a different type of model, different type of governance model with the projects themselves interacting with the BPs, it becomes much more hardened and it prevents those potential attacks from occurring because they will occur or there will be pressures by government, especially if any particular projects start to emerge and become uh, very successful in terms of garnering controversy or user adoptions. And if there's significant profit or opportunities there, and central rulers don't think that they're receiving a cut of those benefits, there could be a lot of pressures there, especially if those businesses are taking away market share from existing legacy communities or systems, businesses, right? Because those businesses today have to pay taxes and have to obey certain rules. And most of that comes into actually pay for play with those, say, authoritative jurisdictions. So you could see that actually changing the dynamics. So one question might be, how does EOS play into that potential risk of confiscation? So again, that would be another opportunity for standard contracts to, um, prevent that. So if you guys remember way back, even before EOS, Dan Larimer actually allegedly came up with the whole notion of uh, decentralized autonomous communities, or DACs. And so, you know, EOS right now, I think how Dan is envisioning this is to create or to evolve EOS to what he has termed as a DAC of DACs. So a decentralized autonomous community of or made up of a number of decentralized autonomous communities. And these could be companies, corporations, churches, or collectives of all kinds and I guess different regions of the world. Um, and so each of these DACs or groups would have their own tokens and governance structures. One particular challenge with this, obviously, is the notion of liquidity. What is really liquidity? It's money flow into a token, right? In the old days, for those that have followed me for a long time, you guys know I've interacted allegedly with a lot of projects like on Ether Delta. And in the early days, one way of playing in that space was to basically, well, some folks would artificially create price discovery uh, by taking advantage of low volume on certain tokens. So if a token, for example, has no volume and a particular user maybe even has a couple 100,000 or $1 million, they can in theory take that money and through a series of transactions, they could actually cause the price to appear to appreciate quite significant, and artificially move the price to a point where other users then feel like they need to FOMO in that token. And so there hasn't, in my opinion, been a good way to develop price discovery on emergent tokens within the crypto space. It is all subject to manipulation. And for the most part, many projects, although no one will admit it, um, they end up going to zero, especially the small ones, because there just isn't that continued level of interest or monetary flow in them. And so, in order to have a sustainable project, you have to be able to sustain interest in it. You have to be able to sustain not only the technical developer interest, but also the monetary interest. And many projects today focus more on just, or a lot of users focus on mooning, or which I hate that word for those that have been around this channel. But most folks just they just prefer to make money, sell out, and go buy a Lambo or something, whatever it is. And so, what's up, Eddie? Um, and so, liquidity to me is still a challenge in the space. I know there's been people who have been successful in trading smaller projects, but I think in the long term, it's a recipe for failure. And so Dan had proposed to develop using the Bancor algorithm a way to develop price discovery for smaller tokens that would be potentially these DAX that would live on EOS. I'm not totally convinced of that. I think there are also some opportunities with this model to maybe reinvent the idea of um, an airdrop in some way for founders. So if you had like the network itself, the EOS network, um, facilitate a token creation event as opposed to say a founder or a group of people within the community, it at least bypass the notion or the idea of a particular smaller group of people um, creating a token for profit. You know, in some jurisdictions, allegedly like the United States, that's still a thing. And believe it or not, these regulators still go after people for that. So maybe one benefit to EOS, perhaps, if we look at it from as a global operating system, if you have this network EOS, almost like an autonomous living organism made up of these block producers, actually themselves create the token creations and not the founders, would that bypass those regulations? I don't know, but I'm just brainstorming here. The other issue I think with DAX or those types of things is how do you incentivize people outside the community to care about the projects within that smaller niche community? And so I still think the idea of having the EOS Foundation or some global community, like global, almost like consensus for consensus was for Ethereum. You know, we would have a arm of that with EOS if they were able to acquire uh, for the benefit of all users some percentage of those tokens for that project, and then airdrop those to all users. Then you have like kind of this original thesis that EOS was born out of, you know, which was, if you guys remember back in the day, EOS was touted as one of those projects that would have like hundreds or thousands of projects. And the whole idea is that if you had EOS, you would have exposure to these other types of systems. And, you know, maybe not all of them would be successful, but some of them certainly would. And so, you know, if we can figure out the mechanics of how to tune that and how to make it so that everybody wins when, say, one smaller project wins, not just EOS as a whole, but just these smaller niche communities or projects. I think it does a couple things. One, it provides some counterbalance in terms of governance, where um, you make sure that the benefits of the smaller ecosystem uh, benefit everybody. It's kind of a win-win, but also it gives some exposure to those projects, right? So the whole idea is to promote these projects, whether they're smaller communities or it could be a reinvented, as we would say on this channel, you know, reinvented Ubers or Airbnbs or much larger ventures that could be born on EOS. You know, how is that actually done or progressed? You need to give people an incentive to actually try your products and services. And most people are not going to want to venture and do those things um, just off the bat. And a lot of people just don't have time. So, you know, inherently having some kind of a easier mechanism to get that exposure, having a one-click model where they have it in this, say, standardized coin market cap, it's kind of blessed by maybe the community in some way. I think it would go a long way to benefit and reassure people that, you know, to try some of these things. But you know, there is still some pitfalls. It is not certainly a single point. It's not single point of failure proof. So with these projects, I still think you have weaknesses with the block producer model. There's only 21 block producers, guys, and I just from my perspective, I guess what I've seen and you guys may not like this, but like even the whole notion of what occurred a couple months ago or several months ago at this point with Eve LaRose, and that they had that contract that got exploited, and they actually rolled the chain back to get those funds because I guess the severity of it is what they had said. But I guess what I'm pointing out, guys, is we already crossed that boat, where the whole idea of the blockchain honoring transactions and sort of the original ethos of crypto um, was changed with EOS and that those moves, and then more recently, even the I guess even the idea with Block One and maybe taking some of those tokens. Um, some people even want to take some of the tokens that had already been allocated to Block One back. We start to get into a gray area where that those type of arguments could be exploited later um, to go against certain individuals, right, for voicing certain opinions. So it starts to really, in my opinion, just create a slippery slope. So I don't think we've seen a true example of a decentralized autonomous community just because of things I just mentioned. I don't think that it actually exists. Now there are certain things that we could add to promote, greater security or greater decentralization or less chance of that occurring, such as multi-sigs um, and BPs versus founders, or maybe both of them coming together to make rules or make changes to a system, changes to code and inflation policies. So I'd like to know, what do you guys think about that? Is that something that's on your radar? Um, uh, and what do you think about the single, this more like standardized contract, the USIO symbol contract with this auction system? The other thing is, it's one thing. It's one move to buy a thing. It's another move to keep a thing, and I'm realizing that. I got this pad in the boonies, and we got a bunch of snow, as you guys could imagine, and all kinds of fun. So it's one thing to buy a thing, it's another thing to keep a thing. And what I mean by keep a thing in the notion of a blockchain or crypto space is how do you maintain the interest in a project? We've seen in the past, there has been some art projects on EOS. There has been some like betting projects on EOS, but none of them had been able to sustain the interest levels. So, we have really yet to see that. And I keep going back to my idea about garnering interest outside EOS. I still don't think we have that strategy developed, even within the Eden community or their leadership there, or even with the EOS Foundation. I keep suggesting that, what I like to see more is people even outside EOS come in and compete and develop their products, and even outside the United States, because the United States has a lot of barriers to entry in terms of issuing tokens or doing even anything on the ground. So if someone here, for example, were to in the United States were to develop a um, Airbnb or an Uber, the chance of that just surviving and the regulators not saying anything is pretty low. Whereas I think if that was developed in an area like Africa or in certain parts of Asia or in more emerging economies, the chances of that project being successful, at least for a pilot and developing the core aspects of the technology, there's a higher chance of that being successful there and thriving and getting to a point where maybe the tools could be piloted here and with less risk for the founders. It could even be ported in from the BPs autonomously, right? So that there's no single founder that's responsible for the service being offered. There's no single person, but it's available to the community as a service. And so I think we should spend more time on developing the incentive models to give people a reason to care about EOS, to focus in on what EOS could offer, how we reinvent business models. And so I still think that part of that could be like a Google X Prize. I really encourage people who aren't familiar with that to look it up. Google X Prizes. It's basically an idea that Google started where they offer like a bounty, like it's a significant amount of reward dollars or prize money. This could be like $1 million. It would have to be at a level that is significant enough to garner interest and energy spent into learning EOS. Because right now there isn't that energy in learning EOS, even within the community. No one's going to spend full time to learn EOS when there aren't users to make money off of. It's economics, guys. And so in order to sweeten the deal, or in order to make it worth someone's wow, you have to have events, you have to have prizes, you have to have reasons for people to care. And I'm not seeing that yet. So to me, EOS, although I love EOS, it still feels like it's a toxic sewer in a sense that there is no new airflow. It's all just people who have been in EOS, who are talking about EOS and are doing certain initiatives with EOS. But I think we need to think beyond that and start to develop or allocate more energy into a strategy that goes above EOS and talks to the greater crypto community and embraces their ideas. And even guys beyond developers, I've recently published some videos by Eric Weinstein, who's kind of an interesting character. I'm not saying I agree with everything he thinks, but it would be really exciting to bring on characters or personalities that haven't traditionally been involved in the crypto space and have them be a part of the governance process, or have them maybe try one of their projects and maybe fail. I mean, even just that amount of interest that some of those personalities garner in terms of level of respect, institutional interest or following, right? It would do a lot for EOS as a project, and it would show a lot of people maybe what this community could potentially do. But again, I think the barriers to entering the United States for a lot of that is a little bit more challenging. So I am recommending, I'd like to see if there's a possibility that the foundation or Eden would consider some X Prize development, X Prize projects. So you fund a team, a smaller team, maybe the core team within the foundation or Eden. I know it's a lot of work, but it should be a top priority for the community to develop its hackathon, a legitimate hackathon with a significant enough prize money pool. $2 million to $5 million. Let's put it out there and let's see what happens. And run that thing for a year or run it for 6 months, because you're going to garner more than say $2 million worth of labor, through say 20 teams or 50 teams or however many teams it ends up being. You're probably going to garner more energy, more I wouldn't say monetary energy, but more equivalent monetary energy into interest within EOS through that system than almost any other system or any other initiative we can think of. And tools are great. Enhanced economics that Dan is talking about is great. But I think relying on one person, even if he's the founder, to come up with the killer application, I don't think, in my opinion, that's a great strategy. I'd rather allocate $1 million, $2 million to challenge the world to come up with the best solution. And that's just Phoenix thinking more like a free market capitalist versus someone who's like, I don't like communism. I don't want to just trust and rely on a person, even though they may be smart or they may have done amazing things for the community. It just seems to me a little something is unsettling about that. So I think if people have ideas, they need to go out and earn them. They need to go out and compete against other people for them, and that way it's a more fair and it levels everybody up in terms of their game. If people don't have competition, what I've seen in my experience is they tend to get lazy, they tend to get complacent, and that's not something we want to see in EOS. So, I'd like to know what you guys think about that. If you have a comment on that, leave it in the chat. Is that something you would support? What do you think the right prize money amount would be? And maybe what is some of the support you could lend to actually getting that idea off the ground? As you guys know, this is kind of a homey channel. It's one of the few that's left for EOS. I do love you guys, and I like to do these, but yeah, having that engagement with you guys, I mean, that, believe it or not, goes a long way into telling me that these videos are worth doing, and it actually inspires me to show up more. So the more likes, the more comments, even if you disagree, I appreciate those tremendously. You'd be surprised. Um, so with that said, guys, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. If you like this video, consider hitting the like button, consider subscribing, uh, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your wife, your side chick, whatever it is that you may have, your pets. Share this channel far and wide, and let me know what you guys think. And I'd love to see you guys in the Telegram chats. Come into the EOS community, even if you're a troll. It's all good. It's all love. So, with that said, I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope everybody's having a beautiful Thursday. And until next time, this is Phoenix signing off. So, peace, guys.